Good afternoon, everyone who's joined so far. Thanks for joining today's webinar. We're going to wait for a few more people to take their time to trickle in, and then we will start momentarily.
Well, good afternoon. I want to welcome everyone to the 11th in the coffee series sponsored by the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership at Seton Hall University. I'm Reggie Lewis, the center's executive director, and it's great to greet you from our campus here in South Orange, New Jersey. The coffee series provides an opportunity to showcase the inspirational stories of servant leaders and the endless ways in which individuals, organizations, and society in general can be transformed by the power of servant leadership, a philosophy in which the leader first seeks to serve. And I assure you that our guest for this session will not disappoint. Our program today is designed to not only deepen our understanding of servant leadership, but to foster an appreciation for ways in which we all can shape lives of hope, healing, and resilience, despite the constant state of turbulence we now find ourselves in. This is why the Greenleaf Center has spent the last 50+ years promoting the awareness, understanding, and practice of servant leadership. In addition to our webinar series, the center's signature programs include supporting research on servant leadership, online learning opportunities for professionals seeking to apply servant leadership in the workplace. We also partner with the university's Upward Bound program to expose high school students to the notion of first seeking to serve. And last fall, we unveiled an annual lecture that brings together thought leaders and issue experts to address significant societal challenges confronting our nation today. This afternoon's webinar was made possible by the generous support of our trustee emeritus, Howard Bahar. Thank you, Howard. Thank you so much. It's now my pleasure to introduce our distinguished guest for today. Paula DiPerna is an internationally recognized expert in environmental finance. She is a strategic advisor on environmental and philanthropic policies to public and private organizations around the world, and a widely published author. She currently serves as special advisor to CDP, an international not-for-profit charity that runs the global disclosure system for investors, companies, cities, states, and regions to manage their impact on the environment. Previously, Ms. DiPerna was president of the international division of the Chicago Climate Exchange, which operated the world's first cap-and-trade system to address climate change and ultimately pioneered emissions trading worldwide. She has also served as president of the Joyce Foundation, a major U.S. philanthropy focused on public policy innovation, and vice president for international affairs for the Cousteau Society, whose principal was ocean explorer Jacques Cousteau. She's currently on the board of advisors of Global Kids, which offers international education to public school students, as well as the Circle of Advisors of Rachel's Network, which links women philanthropists who have environmental interests. And she's on the board of directors of one of my favorites, History Makers, a unique oral and video archive of African-American leadership across all sectors. She received both BA and MA degrees from New York University and continues to be a frequent public speaker and media commentator. Paula, let me make it official. Welcome to the coffee series. Have you got your mug on that end?
And it's red too. Thank you so much, Reggie, and to the team and to Seton Hall and the Greenleaf Center. This is really an honor to be with you this afternoon.
And it's an honor to have you with us. And so let's get started. Let's get started with early influences and roots. Let's talk about home and roots. In other words, you are definitely not a New York transplant. You are indeed a native New Yorker through and through, born in the city, NYU graduate, as I've just mentioned. What are some of your fondest memories of growing up in the city?
So that's a good question. You know, funnily enough, I actually loved the idea that I used to be able to sleep in the subway. I used to take the subway down to my after high school job at Lamston's on 45th in Lexington after school, and you could sleep and we just get on. So I love the idea of that I used to sleep on the subway and like for the whole trip and wake up refreshed, and wow, how fabulous the subway was. But, you know, growing up in the city was just a constant adventure. My parents always made sure that on Sundays they dragged us to this museum or that museum. And, you know, it was just never a dull moment, truly. And we lived a little bit out, we lived in the Bronx, in a very parkland kind of part of the Bronx, the North Bronx. And something I remember, not to belabor, but, you know, the Hutchison River Parkway is a pretty green highway, and it was like our private reserve. You know, we didn't think of it as a highway, we thought of it as a park. And one afternoon there were all these flames, you know, fire on the side of the hutch we called it, and a bunch of us, you know, went racing down there, and we thought, oh my God, look, the fire was out, and look at all the damage to the grass, we should rescue it. So we like went to other places where there was a lot more grass, and we cut it up and tried to become like turf surgeons. You know, we were pretty young. We had no idea how to do it, but maybe that was the beginning of thinking, wow, this is a real shame. This shouldn't be allowed to be left this way. And what can we as kids do? And I think when you grow up in a city like New York, where you're constantly around other people, you do get a sense of, you know, other people. You get a sense of what they're saying, what they're doing, and how you relate to them. So I think in summary, you know, the other thing is you probably all may or may not remember this wonderful song by Dionne Warwick called Where Am I Going? And what I remember is when I would take the subway home, that would be playing in my head, because there's a lyric in it that says, run to the Bronx or Washington Square, no matter where I go, I meet myself there. So that was me. Bronx to Washington Square. So, you know, I felt she was writing it about my life. And, you know, that was really, you know, you meet yourself wherever you go. And that's why it's important to know who you are.
Running from Bronx to Washington Square, sleeping on the subway, and then putting together homemade sod is what I'm hearing. Like,
that's what we tried. Yeah. I should go back and see if we made any dent, but probably not.
Now, you split your time largely between the city and Cooperstown when you're not traveling. Into some of you in the audience, maybe some of my students, you may not be aware that Cooperstown is home to the Baseball Hall of Fame and the acclaimed Glimmerglass Opera House. So there's really no shortage of great things to do in your home, Paula, right?
Yeah, no time though. You know, you have to, I mean, I'm very, very lucky to be able to have the best of both worlds in a sense. And, you know, obviously the traveling out of the country or anywhere really with COVID has been very tamped down. But yeah, I mean, I try to keep busy, but it's great to live in New York State. There's, you know, every climate you can imagine. And I know New Jersey too is a wonderful place and right next door. So no, I'm pretty busy. and I love being in this part of the world.
Well, thanks for always lifting up the Garden State. But now, speaking in terms of your evolution and formative years, I'm just curious, during your days at NYU, both at the undergrad and graduate level, did you imagine yourself becoming this now leading voice on the environment and sustainable development?
No. I mean, I had one goal as a student and as a woman and whatever I was at that time, which was to become a writer.
Okay.
And I didn't care what I wrote about. I just wanted to get published. And by published, I mean in a professional magazine or whatever outlet where there was an editor who said, you know, Paula, that's a great story and you did a great job and we're going to publish it. And I still have, I took about 15 photographs of my first check, which was $150. My first professional piece, and I probably still have the photos, and I went and bought a piece of African sculpture actually with it, which I still have, piece of Yoruba, from Yoruba, because I wanted to spend that money on something that I would never, that I'd always have. So no, I mean, and that's kind of, you know, the transition was to Cousteau, which changed everything. But in terms of your topic and servant leadership, you know, part of that was about me. I was very eager to get published under my name and be a writer because that was what I wanted. And I didn't see any actual, quote, serving angle to that at the beginning. It all came a bit later, but right away it was pure passion, pure drive. That I don't know, you know, my mother wanted to be a writer. I loved the idea of being a writer, and that was my goal. I basically got a master's degree to become a writer and to teach also. And teaching was to prop me up so I would have an income while I was a writer, because I knew writers didn't make a lot of money. So it was a part of the evolution.
Well, you've certainly provided us with a range of gifts as a result of that writing, but I want to stay on this area of sort of early career highlights. And I have to say, some of us here on this college campus are old enough to know who Jacques Cousteau was. I still recall being sort of glued to my parents' black and white. Yes, Tim and Priscilla, black and white TVs, but imagining myself traveling with Cousteau. So to those who are unfamiliar, Cousteau was a scientist, filmmaker, and ocean explorer concerned with ocean research, but also environmental protection more broadly, particularly as relates to our vast seas and waterways. So Paula, I know you get this question all the time. What was it really like working with Jacques Cousteau and the Cousteau Society?
So I think it's important for people to, I mean, it was extraordinary, but it didn't seem extraordinary at the time. And I've learned that you never feel that if you're doing something extraordinary, it's better not to appreciate it as extraordinary while you're trying to do it. You just do it. And Cousteau, of course, changed my life in many ways, but you know, he was also the inventor of the aqualung and the inventor of scuba diving pretty much as a result. So for people who have their, you know, Google Watch today, and you can just put it into the ocean and turn it on and it'll make movies for you, or certainly even your telephone or whatever other gadget. Thinking back to those times there when he was working after World War II and even a bit during World War II, he made it possible for people to dive underwater without being hooked up on land. And he was an inventor. He co-invented the aqualung. He hooked up with a French guy named Jacques Gagnon, who had figured out how to create a valve that prevented cooking gas from blowing back into the kitchen so people wouldn't die of explosion or breathing the gas. And Cousteau said, maybe I can adapt that to diving, because he was like, well, he wasn't like me, but he had a dream, which was to be able to dive freely. That was his personal dream. It didn't have anything at the beginning to do with protecting the oceans. It was only when he got under there. And even then at the beginning, you know, when he got under there and saw, holy cow, this really is another world. This might as well be outer space. I mean, no one had seen it in the world at that time. Certainly not in any extensive manner. People were skin diving and skin diving worldwide, but they didn't talk about it. They didn't have platforms. He got on television. And all that being said, at one point was probably one of the 10 most recognized people on the planet. 200 million people watched our shows on the same night. You know, he was viral without any kind of viral identification. And he was the world's most humble person. You know, he lived to have fun. He became ultimately the ultimate, I would say, servant leader. But, you know, you walk down the street with him, couldn't get going because every person come up, stop, want to shake his hand. Thank you, Captain Cousteau, for what you're doing. Almost to a person, they said that. And he would put his bag down and shake the hand.
Wow.
He never, you know, he was extremely humble and very good to me, wonderful companion to travel with, very fair, very just, full of sense of humor, bought us lunch every day, you know, generous with his time. And fair. If the thing says by Jacques Cousteau, he wrote it. If it says by Paula DiPerna, I wrote it. And we collaborated, but he never took credit for something that he didn't do, honestly.
So you're able to put that gift of writing immediately to use in working for Cousteau.
Yeah, that was one of the reasons that, you know, I volunteered to work for him in the first place, which I probably should mention because, you know, I was getting published as a writer and I thought, you know, wow, this is good, but now I don't really know anything about the natural world. And I began to feel that environmental issues were becoming pressing and would be pressing, and where could I go to pick up some more, you know, info for stories? Because I'd been advised to write about what you know, and I wrote a lot about public schools because I'd been teaching, and I ran out of stuff to write about. And I thought, okay, what next? And I thought if I'm going to write about what I know, I better find out about oceans and things of that nature. So I volunteered to work for the Cousteau Society as a writer and editor. I saw a little ad saying they were looking for volunteers to work on a book. I thought, fine, I'll give them a few hours.
Okay.
And I'll get something out of it. And the next day they called me and offered me a job, and I stayed there for 20 years.
Wow. Wow. And of course, this was more than just, you know, a guy traveling to exotic places in a boat with his friends. This work led to a heightened sense of awareness. So you all were the early stewards of environmentalism. Say a little bit more about that sense of being a steward from an environmental perspective in the Cousteau Society.
Yeah, well, I mean, Cousteau's mantra was people protect what they love. And, you know, he figured people wouldn't protect much more than that. So his whole thing was, okay, this is an entirely new world. Who knew? Who knew the beauty of it? Who knew how magnificent it was? And so at first it was a pursuit of beauty. Let's film it. It's beautiful. Put it on TV. And, you know, those films today stand the test of time, actually, although they're pretty slow compared to some things, you know, they don't have TikTok rhythm. But as he repeatedly would go down, especially in the Mediterranean, you know, from one year to the next, there'd be a change. There'd be a slope of dirt that got pushed down and suffocated a reef because some hotel got built, or the size of tuna was, you know, shrinking, and they weren't seeing these large fish anymore in different parts. So he began to wonder, like, how come all this stuff is changing so quickly? And then it became a question of, oh, I think human behavior must be the cause, and what can we do about that? Because stewardship then became the goal. We'll tell the stories to protect the ocean so people fall in love with the ocean, and they will therefore become part of the army of protection. So the whole thing was almost a seduction. Look how beautiful it is. Don't you love it? If you love it and you want to see it for future generations, you have to be involved in protecting it. And so that became a big part of my motivation and my ability to convey that through him. He became a vehicle for me in a sense, but I was also his vehicle because I was writing for him and with him. And we did a lot of other things. I mean, among the things we achieved together, thanks to his fame, but also I'd like to say thanks to my prodding in the sense of operationalizing. So I think that's really important for leaders. You know, you can have a lot of ideas and you can think you're a servant and bringing people together, but if you can't implement, it's just theoretical. And so we got an agreement with the collaboration of the then White House and the French president to put a moratorium on Antarctica, so that there would be no mineral or oil exploration in Antarctica for 50 years, starting 1990. So that's still running. That's called the Madrid Protocol. Together, he and I got 50 political prisoners out of Cuba, right under the nose of the State Department when the US and Cuba were at big odds, and we convinced the State Department to help us bring them into the country. That we did together. So there are constant things that we did together that stewarded the broader human family, not only the oceans. And as I said, he was victorious because people loved him and recognized him. Those were the two things.
Wow. Amazing work. Let's delve a bit more into leadership. And I know you've supported the work of the Tallberg Global Leadership Prize and other leadership development efforts, which has allowed you to do some thinking about how leadership should be defined. And so just for our audience, if you could share a bit about how your thinking on leadership has evolved in recent years, particularly as it relates to understanding servant leadership in contrast to the more traditional hierarchical forms of leading others.
Well, I mean, I guess I always felt that to be a leader was to be first. That's by definition who leaders were. They were the ones who got there first or who broke the records. You become a leader in this, you become a leader in that. And the first to do this, the first to do that. And I've come around to believing that really the best kinds of leaders embody a goal of being a good example, of exemplifying their values in a way that other people appreciate, and which lends legitimacy also back to the people who are reflecting their authority, or rather giving you the legitimacy to act, so to speak, on their behalf. So if I understand, the idea of servant leadership correctly, where your immediate goal for being a quote leader is to bring the needs of other people into focus and to serve those needs without putting aside your personal drives,
right.
Your personal passions, to use those personal passions and drives and skills for this broader sense of service. So I've kind of almost gone through three stages of it, really.
Excellent.
The first, the model, and then the broader, service. And back to CDP, it's a kind of servant leader organization because it serves the people and the planet. It's a kind of no point in having the organization if it's not going to be of service. Absolutely.
Which is a nice segue into the last segment of my structured interview with respect to sort of environmental justice and stewardship. And obviously having you as a guest today is timely, not only in terms of our celebration of Earth Day later this month, but definitely in light of Tuesday's front page story in the New York Times about the latest UN report on climate change. So during your time as president of the International Division of the Chicago Climate Exchange, you and your colleagues managed to create and operate the world's first cap and trade system to address climate change. And before I ask you to explain to our audience the significance of that accomplishment, could you step back a bit and help us de-jargonize this and tell us, what does this capping emissions stuff entail? And forgive the irreverence, right. It's not stuff.
I'm going to go back to my original idea of being a leader, because I might be the first person who can actually try to get that across. It's complicated. So then there's all variations on the theme, but this is it in a nutshell. There's only one planet and there's only so much atmosphere above the Earth. And it is in the same relationship to the Earth as the peach fuzz is to a peach. That's how little atmosphere there is. And I wish I could claim credit for that, but that was said by one of the astronauts who went up on one of the shuttle missions that we forget all about, not one of the famous ones. But I find that so vivid because that's essentially you can rub the peach fuzz off with your thumb. If you go like this on your cheek, there's a little fuzz there, gone. That's how much atmosphere there is. And we have been using it as a dump. And if you think of it as a penthouse, the most luxury real estate on the planet, it would be what we're doing with the atmosphere now is the same as we would be doing if we rented this luxury, or rather someone gave us the gift of a weekend in a luxury penthouse in the most beautiful part of the world. And we use that weekend to take all the old papers and rags and garbage from our kitchen and stored it there for the weekend. So what the cap and trade does is the reverse. It says this penthouse is so precious and rare that we can no longer afford to just dump in it, and certainly not for free. So if we have to dump in it, that is to say there's no alternative, it's going to cost money. And so the cap means to cap the use of the atmosphere. And people who figure out a way to use it the least, they get the benefit of being able to sell their quote right to use it to other people who haven't been able to reduce their emissions significantly. And so, but everyone stays under this same cap. It's like going on a carbon diet. And nobody almost cares when you go on a diet how you get on the diet or what you choose to eat or not eat. But when you get on the scale, it's in pounds. So the measurement, or kilos, the measurement of the atmosphere is metric tons. So IPCC knows exactly how many metric tons are going up and exactly how many have to come down. And to get them out requires a certain technological investment, and the cap and trade can generate money for that, because the incentive it would be on you, Reggie, to speed along, be a leader, be first to reduce your emissions. And I'm slow and a laggard, and you and I make a deal, but together, no more emissions are going up.
Wow. Thank you. Peach fuzz. The work that you and your colleagues are doing at CDP is equally pioneering. And just to remind our audience, CDP is an NGO that runs a global disclosure system. You all have come up with the world's only integrated environmental disclosure system. So tell us why this is so groundbreaking and how we might try to push this to a broader scale.
Yeah, well, that is also, somewhat esoteric, but again, for a long time, environmentalism has had nothing to do with money. People thought, that environmentalism was a metaphysical state, and that if you went off into the woods or on the top of a mountain or underwater enough, you would acquire this metaphysical solidarity, and we needed to protect the atmosphere for that reason, and the earth for that reason, because it was human sustenance. And that's true. And perhaps one of the major, if not the major reason. But there is also an economic argument. And there are people who argue, well, you should never talk about money when you're talking about something so vital and divine. But on the other hand, if you don't talk about money, the place gets trashed, which is what's happened. So, with regard to CDP, their insight some years ago, and I didn't work with them then, was, if you own stock in a company, you can ask the company to tell you how they're operating and to explain their financial performance. Now, you could regard us all as, quote, not owning stock in the planet, but we're stakeholders in the planet. So CDP set up a system where investors would ask companies to tell them how they were managing their climate change risk and performance. The idea being that if you officially report to your shareholder and you lie under securities law regulating, stock markets, that's a criminal offense. So it took the idea of pollution. I mean, when Cousteau was noticing the first pollution in the Mediterranean Sea and that the sewage pipes were way out in the middle of the sea, he would say it's because people are ashamed. That's why these pipes are so far out. They don't want to know we don't want anyone to know how far we're dumping that sewage. But he didn't have any real teeth until there was law. But even then, the law didn't really tie back into the fiduciary responsibility that comes with in the stock markets, in theory, not always working, but in theory, there has to be integrity of the markets. So the disclosure project that CDP created set up a structure where companies gradually had to tell their shareholders what their environmental performance was all about. We score it, we collate the data, we put a score on it, and we tell the companies you're a laggard, you're a leader, so-called. And the importance there, and this has been advanced recently, that if you characterize an environmental circumstance as having financial implications, that is illuminating to people. They don't actually understand that. And, you know, from the household point of view, or even, you know, it's like all these climate change disruptions that people are being kicked out of their houses, and because some kind of crazy tornado comes in, those people have nothing to go back to. FEMA might pay them some money to spend a night in a shelter or a hotel, but if that house has been blown apart, they go back, their householder insurance probably doesn't cover it. Climate change may or may not be liable, but nobody makes those people whole. And the only way to start bringing in a concept of covering those costs is to identify environmental disruption as an economic disruption, and a major one at that. And that's more and more obvious, I think.
Excellent. In the few minutes I have left, I just want to ask a couple of questions, sort of tying this, since we're talking about impacts from the standpoint of the economy. Climate change, as you and I have discussed in the past, often gets caught up in claims that, you know, in adopting these more progressive policies on, say, more various forms of renewable energy, you're going to automatically lead to a reduction in jobs. What do you say to that?
I mean, that is nonsense, and it's been nonsense from the beginning. But you know, again, back to the idea of leadership, the environmental movement for a long time wasn't concerning itself with that question, wasn't concerning itself with the human interaction, because it was still quite a metaphysical thing. And we've fallen behind on the case, which is that when you think about it right now, and it's a reaction to a crisis, but to deal with climate change, let alone water and forest and other aspects, we have to retrofit, redesign, reinvent, rehabilitate, redeploy, everything. We have to reindustrialize. We have to find new ways, new materials to basically recreate our lives for the sake of reducing emissions. And that is probably the biggest jobs creator effort in the history of this existing generation, or 100 years of generations, because we're finally seeing that the green economy is the economy, that everything is underpinned by natural resources, by ability to travel, to ship things around, to have things to ship. You know, this is the last stat I'll throw out, not that I've been throwing out stats, but people don't realize that the environmental industry, so-called, before COVID had $650 billion in sales. So what is that? That's goods and services related to protecting the environment. That's 25 times the sales that Walmart has in a given year. It's 2.5 times the size of Apple sales. So we're not talking like a marginalized industry here. We're talking about a very pivotal part of our economy. So for people who are studying, or who have, and many students do, they want to have a job with purpose. They want to go to work and be proud of what they're doing. You wake up in the morning, you have a whole closet full of clothes. What suit do you put on? The villain suit? No, you don't say, oh, great, I'm going to put this villain suit on and be terrible all day long. No, you want to put that suit on that makes you feel proud of what you're doing with your time. And so there's so much work that has purpose and is environmentally connected that it's a bonanza, really, but we got to get focused on it.
Well, I think very few people know about that stat of 650 billion, you say? 650 billion. My last question, my team here is pushing me to get us open for the Q&A, but I'd be remiss in not asking you to say more about how we should essentially fundamentally restructure how we live. I mean, it's sort of akin to the alarm raised in the UN report. First of all, should we truly be alarmed? Do we have less than 10 years to achieve something called a 1.5 degrees Celsius?
Yeah, well, already it's confusing, right? Because most people think, 1.5 degrees, of course, it's Celsius. If they had a fever of 99, which is a degree, and they don't think they're dying, right? But it is a problem. There is data that suggests that we, think of that little atmosphere. What's going on is all the weather is up in this tight space. And because the greenhouse gases are blocking the sun's, the ability for the earth to reflect the heat back, all that weather is going crazy because it's crowded in this tiny little space. And that's not going to change until there is not so much crowding up there. And we have a very limited time to stop the crowding. And so we may be in a world where we have to adapt to these crazy weather patterns. So, it's doable to adapt, but it might not be fun to live in that world, or it may not be great for poor people who get blown out of their house and nobody makes them whole. And then they get blown out of the next place. And still they don't have a way of coping. So it is a crisis. It's a fantastic opportunity at the same time. How do we change our lives? I think the first and most simple thing that anybody and everybody could do is just stop wasting stuff. Stop wasting water, stop wasting energy, stop wasting time. And, think about it. I'll give you an example. I love cardamom cinnamon tea, and I had a wonderful package of it, and it got discontinued by the producer. So I went online and what does it say? That they can ship it to me. Amazon or whoever. It was discontinued in the stores, but I could still get it if I ordered it by Amazon. And you know how close I came to doing that? And then I thought, Paula, get real here. You're not the Queen of Sheba or the Queen of England. You're going to have tea flown to you, arrive in a cardboard box that you're going to have to deal with at some point for tea. Who do you think you are? And I'm very proud to say I stopped, but I'm not proud to say I had the thought of doing it. And I think we all need to really reflect on these very simple daily choices. That would be the first thing. And the second thing is not to feel paralyzed about it, to go for the hopeful part, the opportunity part, the purpose part, and not to be cowed by the difficulties, because if it was easy, somebody would have solved the problem already. It is difficult, and it's time to get at it.
Absolutely.
And it's not that we haven't been, but we need to accelerate.
We have to accelerate. Well, I could go on another hour with you, but I'm going to shift now to our Q&A portion, and Tim is going to lead us in that process.
Thank you, Reggie. So now for our Q&A, a first question that we have for you would be, reflecting on your life accomplishments, what are some of the things that you're most proud of?
I have to say I'm proud of pretty much everything, but the things that I'm most proud of on the environment side is that Antarctica Treaty. I mean, that was significant. I'm very proud of the prisoner release with the Cuban prisoners. I mean, 50 people is not a lot, but they were in prison before and now they're not. And I'm very proud of my writing, and I'm proud of the people I've been able to bring around me. I'm proud that I was sufficiently wise to get to know Reggie, for example. And I'm proud of the fact that I haven't allowed, because of kind of accidental events, which I've described earlier, I'm lucky that I'm not siloed, and I'm proud of the fact that I didn't let myself get pigeonholed, because that would have been pretty easy. When I was going to high school, you probably don't believe this, but no one talked to women about going to law school, medical school. I was tracked into the stenography program to be a commercial, to be a secretary. And turned out to be great, because now I take red steno, and if I'm at a press conference, nobody can tell what I'm writing. So that's pretty good. And I love taking steno, but it was my destiny not to be here today.
All right, And next question, this is coming from Jean Wright, and Jean's saying that you may have already addressed this question, being the last question that Reggie just asked, and about how we should be a little bit more conscientious about our decisions. But Jean's asking, for those of us on a servant leader journey, what can we do to take action to make a difference in the environment? So maybe something else outside of being conscientious, if you have something to add to that.
Yeah, I think take a look at what drives you and what your passions are and apply them to an environmental effort. And it's such a dispersed, or rather diverse, it's as in all things, diversity brings excellence. There's no excellence in society without diversity, racial, ethnic, etc. And the same is true in environmental efforts. There has to be a diversity of approaches. So whether you're going to go to law school or business or anything, there's a way to direct that passion into an environmental effort. And that's what I would do, apart from the earlier thing about looking at your decisions. And this is a kind of decision, but really to just conscientiously say, I believe in this, and my passion is this, and I can put the two things together.
Next question. What are your thoughts on the president's decision to further tap the Strategic Petroleum Reserve for an additional $180 million of barrels of oil?
That's a very tough one. I don't know if there were many choices available. It's certainly not a great choice. It's unprecedented. It will create more greenhouse gas emissions, but the world could have avoided doing that if we had prepared earlier in diversifying again our energy sources and making sure that nobody could blackmail the world with one given type of energy, let alone blackmail a continent or a single country. So I'm not happy that had to be done, but it was probably inevitable.
Is there anything else that we should really know about the consequences that this might have?
About the burning of the oil or the release
Yes.
of the strategic reserve? Yeah, because if we don't learn that lesson and allow that to continue, that problem of lack of diversity of energy sources to continue and to get worse, we don't improve our grid, the next maniac, and which there's no shortage in the world, could hold the world hostage again, just the way Mr. Putin, or rather Putin, is holding us hostage now. So the thing we should know is that this is, again, yet another warning sign that there's more to it than just the release of the oil, that there's a lot of background to that decision and the need to avoid it ever having to be done again.
All right. Likely our last question. Is there a certain quote that you really live by, or that you keep in the back of your mind, as you go out your week or your day?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, there are and there aren't, but I think I've been struggling with this for some time of late, particularly through COVID, because I was lucky that I didn't have to get my kids to school. I didn't have to figure out where to go, had to avoid exposure. I was pretty isolated up in Cooperstown. But I did give a lot of thought to the whole purpose of society. Why do I care if I'm isolated? I'm perfectly happy here, set the fireplace, make dinner. What is missing? And obviously I knew what was missing, but there was always something I couldn't quite touch. So I kept thinking about it. And I guess there are two things I would quote that make a lot of sense to me, which is the basic golden rule. I don't think you can improve on it. Do unto others as you would like others to do unto you, whatever it is. And if that's your guidepost, you almost can't go wrong. You're not going to bring down on yourself harm. You're not going to bring harm to others. And you're going to sort of keep yourself in relationship to others, which is critical, certainly critical for leaders. And the other thing is something that's almost a little bit the opposite, because that first one is a little self-conscious, could be a little heavy, But I worked with a wonderful Hungarian designer named Eva Zeisel. I wrote about her, and then I became a lifelong friend of hers. She was a pioneer. She was a first. She was also a servant leader in many ways because she was a political activist. But she always said that, if you're not going to have fun in life, you might as well skip it. And I think that's true too, that life, if you let life do, life can be fun, can be pleasurable, it should be, must be. And I like to think of that. I like to think that every day is something I look forward to. And I do look forward to every day, in part because I like to think that I can bring fun and pleasure to my life and to others, as well as try not to be an angel, but try to stay in that zone of not doing more, not doing to others what I would not want done to me.
Thank you. That was a great answer. We have a couple more questions coming in. So another one. It seems environmental awareness has grown immensely in the last decade. How can humanity avoid keeping on taking commitments for the environment and then failing to deliver on those?
Well, there's a question of do unto others, don't do unto others as you would like others to do unto you. You can't keep promising things and never delivering. That's a failure. So I think that erodes our individual sense of dignity if we keep on promising. It certainly erodes our political credibility. It erodes the system that gives authority. It erodes the whole model of leadership where you're trying to represent the interests of others. How can you do that legitimately if you make a promise and you fail to keep it? Now, that being said, and back to that previous question, things have to work in practice. You have to implement, and implementation is critical. Otherwise, credibility is lost, and then it's just, we're all talking. And I think it's really important also for leaders to understand that at some point you probably have to synthesize input and make a decision. And if you're lucky, you have brought the people along who need to help implement, and they will help implement because it represents their interests, because they see you've met their needs, and because they have given you a definition of need that's broad. It's not just what they want, but what they need in order to have their own dignity. So I think, long story short, you can't overpromise and still have dignity. It just doesn't come together. So we have to be cautious about that. But, we just have to meet the promises we've already made. We don't have to make no need for more promises. The need is to implement what's already on the table, most especially the Paris Agreement in 5 years ago, where every country brought in an NDC, nationally determined contribution. Every country on Earth said that by 2030, it would be delinking its emissions growth from its economic growth and gradually beginning to reduce in order to keep the world on a path to what Reggie said earlier, avoid the global warming beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius. I forget the 1.5, it doesn't matter in the strict sense of my day, but the big promise is there. And if we just met that one, we'd be on top of the problem, at least close to being on top of the problem.
Okay, I think we will wrap it up after one more question. So this last question, do you have a specific current thought leader that you currently follow on these issues of leadership and the environment?
That's a good one. Let me think. Funnily enough, Janet Yellen is somebody who I follow a lot. I mean, she's of another generation of student, and she's not considered an environmentalist, but she's been a breakthrough thinker in terms of how you create pioneering efforts in the financial world that tie back to environmentalism. And Bill McKibben, is someone, Peggy Shepard, who runs West Harlem Environmental Action, is someone I greatly admire and I look to for guidance, certainly on the environmental justice front. Those are a couple.
Okay. Sorry, this is going to be our last question. So if we were to build on the opportunities for jobs in the energy sector as also a way to confront longstanding environmental justice concerns, what options might we consider?
So on the jobs thing, the most important thing to understand is that these are not, most of the jobs connected to environmental improvement are indirectly connected. A lot of people think about designing a wind turbine or, the obvious green things, planting trees, but there's so much work that's indirect. So for example, the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning industry, which is huge and employs people of all skills levels, all training levels, lots of entry level, lots of senior level. You just take that one industry, and what does that really mean from an environmental point of view? It means energy efficiency. So if we just tackle that thing, people who are already carpenters, already running energy businesses, already installing air conditioners, maintaining air conditioners, there's work for everyone. And the portals to it, the access to it, we risk narrowing it unnecessarily if we think of it as, quote, only the greenest of the green is a green job. A green job is one that advances environmental health. So as long as that's the objective of the work, it's an indirect green job. And as long as we're willing to talk about indirect green work, then there's something there for everyone regardless. And the environmental justice, there's so many leaders in environmental finance and in engineering. One of the leading environmental climate modelers was named Dr. Warren Washington, an African-American man who was the first African-American to get a PhD in meteorology in this country. He also was a pioneer. He was hired as a student intern by the US Navy to help them. This is some decades ago, because the Navy was beginning to worry about weather and they didn't know how to predict it in a long-term basis. They asked Dr. Washington to work with them. So he was such a pioneer, and he's not talked about that much, but he advised 6 presidents on climate change. He was in the back room advising them. And he was a true pioneer, and he finally got his recognition when President Obama gave him the National Medal of Science. I had never heard of him. And not to say that means much, but I should have known who he was. Why didn't I? Because he wasn't visible. Why wasn't he? Because he was African-American, very likely. And so environmental justice and racism prevented his being visible. So environmental justice is not only making sure that there's equity in the green jobs market, or that toxic waste is not dumped on impoverished communities anymore. It's beyond that. It's putting a diverse leadership face forward. And again, back to diversity and its purpose is to create diversity of thought, diversity of effort, and that brings you excellence. So it's really important, I think, to bring that leadership face to the equity movement.
Thank you, Paul. And before I let Tim close this out, I just want to personally thank you for being a part of our program today and sharing your journey, but also reminding us that the current environmental crisis is really our opportunity to create a more livable planet. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it, and I like the questions. Thank you, Tim, and thank you, Priscilla. Bye-bye.
So Tim will close us out. See you soon, Paula.
Now, just a couple things before we wrap up today. Don't forget to sign up for the Greenleaf Academy. We are offering Foundations of Servant Leadership this month, starting on April 28th. If you enjoyed today's webinar, then you can sign up for the next Coffee with webinar featuring former Treasurer of the United States, Jovita Carranza. Registration is now available on our website, greenleaf.org. If you have missed out on any past webinars, you can also visit our YouTube channel to watch recordings featuring servant leader exemplars like former Starbucks CEO Howard Bahar and CNN contributor Chris Purnell. Thank you again, Paula, for a great webinar, and thank you to all our listeners for being a part of it. See you at our next Coffee With webinar.